Gary, hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks, Leo. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, very good. Gary, thank you for your article we sent out this week. That's had some excellent feedback, very clear. Couple of questions on there. We've got numerous examples by country of self-isolation, laissez-faire, limited lockdowns. The World Health Organization charts are evidencing outcomes. Are you expecting any correlation between stock market performance by country and the COVID-19 outcomes of the countries now or into the future? For example, we've got Sweden against the other European countries with their relaxed approach to the lockdown, USA, Brazil, China. What are your thoughts?
I think it's too early to say whether there'll be a relationship between stock market performance and policy of dealing with COVID-19. A lot of that comes from what happened in the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. And subsequently, when economists look back, what they found was that the regions, particularly in the US, where different policies were adopted by city, but generally the cities and the regions that locked down the quickest and for the longest had a better recovery economically. Now, that won't necessarily be the same this time round, and there's a very good reason for that. The Spanish flu hammered age groups across the board. And I was talking to a consultant friend of mine recently who said one of the reasons for that was the strength of your immune system reaction to Spanish flu very often created a lot of fluid on the lungs and you died of pneumonia. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 doesn't work in the same way. Those with very strong immune systems have tended to be largely unaffected. Young, healthy people are really breezing through this pandemic, but that wasn't the case in 1918. Now, think for a minute, if a lot of your healthy youngsters are wiped out by a pandemic, it devastates your economy. That's not the lockdown doing it, that's the pandemic doing it. This is very different. So it's extremely difficult to see which countries are likely to have the better and the worst outcomes with regard their economy and therefore their financial markets. So it really is too early to say. What I do think will be telling is the countries that have the best economic and fiscal response, I think, will do the least damage to their economies in the long run. So this time round, we may find that those countries that go into lockdown for the longest with the smallest fiscal response are actually the baddest hit, and that wouldn't have been the case in 1918. So it's difficult, Leo, isn't it? You know, there's an old saying that, the past doesn't repeat, but it echoes. But in this case, it doesn't look like it's going to repeat at all with regard pandemics over the last 100 years.
Sure. What about with schools on lockdown, the next working generation, if you like, today's schooling generation? Do you foresee that there might be some impact as a result of what's happening to the younger generation now and how that might affect businesses into the future?
It's huge. It's huge. I know teachers in private schools and they are constantly educating kids at home on video education. Mm-hmm. And I know teachers in state schools, some of them in difficult areas, that are really no more than an extension of our welfare state at the moment. State school kids are falling even further behind privately educated kids than they normally are. And that does not augur well for the future. And I think the quicker we can get those children back into school, the better it will be. Never mind the economy, let's think about that generation of children. They need educating. That's how you're going to get more out of life, more out of yourself if you get a decent education. And at the moment, they're not getting it. And I think that's very, very worrying.
It's not just the education, is it, as well, Gary? It's the social skills and interaction as well. It's a very sort of fertile time in life to be developing those skills, and we need people to be back out there.
Oh, we do. Absolutely. We need to get those kids back into school as fast as we possibly can.
Gary.
I can tell you that is good for the economy, because if you get kids back to school, you get their parents back to work.
Sure.
But let's just set aside the fact that, you know, we're in financial markets and money's important. What about those children? What about they won't get those months back, that learning. You know, even Boris Johnson throwing $1 billion at it, he will not make up for what's just gone on. So I think the best we can do now is just make sure it doesn't prolong.
Sure. Gary, I want to touch on the announcement regarding the recession, 20.4% drop in April. Just quickly looking, we can see The Guardian using language like lockdown paralyses the economy. Latest figures double the drop during the miners' strikes and the winter of discontent in the 70s. April was catastrophic. What's your take on that 20.4?
Well, it's better than I expected. I was actually quite pleased with 20.4%. We knew it was going to be a disaster. You can't lock the economy down like that and expect you'll get anything other than the worst decline in GDP output that we've ever experienced. But it could have been a lot worse. Remember, the OBR was saying at one stage that it could be 35% in the quarter. So I think we got what we expected to get, which was a big decline. What happened? COVID is going to hit the economy. We knew that. What matters is the speed that we get back to normal. And as you saw in that article that I issued, if we get a quick recovery, if you get a V-shaped recovery, the long-term damage isn't that great. And in actual fact, what you might find is that you get some positives from this, because you'll perhaps get a better drive. It'll be a shake-up to commerce and business, and perhaps we'll get some improvements in productivity, which we haven't had for 10 years. So I'd say to anybody, don't worry about what's gone. Don't worry about that 20%. That was always coming. Worry about how fast we get this economy up and running again.
While I'm out and about, Gary, I observe that people appear a little more relaxed regarding the social distancing measures as people are walking past. Now, you know, it's prudent to maintain adherence to the guidelines from the government, but we're waiting for announcements on whether they're going to reduce the 2 metres, etc., etc. So my point is, it feels a little like society is returning to this normal that people talk about. Are we seeing anything similar in the markets going off at the moment?
Yes. I think that's a very, very good analogy. Different reasons. I think people with their social distancing are just seeing the numbers of infections and the death rates come down. And as the data's coming out, it's not looking as scary. COVID-19 is devastating for older people, and it hardly affects younger people at all. So those youngsters are going to get a little bit more relaxed about things. I think that's natural human nature. The initial scare is past, and people are beginning to think it's coming to an end. I think markets began to look at that in mid-March, and that's why you got that stonking recovery in share prices. You know, when the S&P 500, the big stocks in the US, started to recover the latter part of March, they went up 40%. Markets look through and begin to work out what the true implications are, and I think that's a good indication of markets responding in what I think has been quite a logical way. But let me just warn anybody watching this, you are still going to get a lot of wobbles. There is going to be a lot of wobbles. You've got big issues on debt, there's big issues on fiscal intervention. Politics is going to be very different going forward, and at different stages, things are going to worry markets, as it always happens. If you can keep your nerve, keep focused on the long term, make sure you've got some cash for liquidity and emergencies, sit it out. That would be my message to everybody.
Great. Gary, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Great to catch up with you again, and I'll look forward to our next session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions, and as always, if you have any more, send them through and we'll get them to the right people. Gary, I'll talk to you again soon.
Cheers, Leah. Bye.
Take care.